Let's start with the Demon Deacons win, because I think I was just talking to Connor O'Neill the other day, and we were putting out an APB out on, Parker Fredrickson, and we had a Parker Fredrickson sighting. Obviously they needed it because SMU is a good team, and Wake needed a win, especially that one. But what does this mean ultimately going forward for the Deacs?
It's a totally different dimension to the offense. And, I just assumed he was going to break out of the slump, at some point this season. Now, I would have thought it would have been in, December, not February. But to have a guy like Parker who can run around and shoot threes, and you can use a player like that in a bunch of different ways because he can come off the screens, he can space to the corner, he can be a zone buster. Wake Forest has often been good if you think about how they have used Damari Monsanto in years past, or how they used Fredrickson last year, using those guys as screeners to help get guys open and then having those guys pop out for three-point opportunities too. If this is something they can bank on for the rest of the year, if he's just a high volume, high 30s, low 40s% three-point shooter, it gives them, it makes them deeper for sure, but it also just sort of opens up the playbook. It opens up the floor for guys like Hunter Salas, Cam Hildreth, Efton Reed, Trayvon Spillers, Tyler Johnson, all these guys that either want to finish in the paint or finish in the post. So it was a big deal, and obviously a great win. I know SMU didn't have Booby Miller either, but for Wake to get that win without Cam Hildreth, who's been their second, third best player this season, was significant for Steve Forbes and company.
Yeah, the truth is that whether I hate to use Joe Lunardi as an example because it's not a great example. But if you are in a position where everybody who does brackets has you in the same part of the at-large pool, so you're either, a hair in or out, then these types of wins matter. Doesn't mean, Lunardi in his bunker on Saturday, they were the winner of this game is on the right side of the bubble. We got 3 weeks of regular season basketball left.
Yeah. By the way, just scintillating back and forth between Lunardi and Eric Devendorf during the Wake SMU
it's the worst.
Really just gripping, thrilling stuff that I loved having during the middle of the broadcast.
It is terrible. It is.
Yeah,
it just makes for a very. First of all, it's insulting to the basketball watching person, whoever's watching the game.
Happening. There's a game literally happening.
Right.
As this is taking place. It's crazy.
Do this at halftime. Don't bother me during a game with Joe Lunardi in a lower box. I don't care. I like Joe. I've known Joe for literally 30 years. So I like Joe. But I know people go, well, he's not that good at it. They're all about the same. We're dealing with such fractions of percentages. Lunardi will get one team in wrong. Same thing with Jerry Palm, who's actually going to be on the show tomorrow. But the bottom line, the bottom line is that I love Jerry's just the driest guy ever. He is a popcorn fart. But they're in a part of the bracket where everybody agrees that a Wake loss in a game like that is significant. And a Wake win is also significant. Doesn't put him in, wouldn't have kept him out, but it gives them another good win, and that was a good win for Wake Forest. I still think that they're not deep enough to be consistently good. They are way too heavily reliant on their three best players. Can Parker Fredrickson do this again? We'll see. Let me get to the Wolfpack. Different part of we're not even talking about an at-large bid here. We're talking about can they make the ACC tournament?
They're on the bubble for the ACC tournament.
That is unfortunate, and it's too bad it's not an objective selection, right? You can say, well, they're better than this. We're going to put them in because that's not how it's going to work. They need to catch Notre Dame because they lose the tiebreaker with Cal. If they can get to 6 wins, maybe Cal won't win again. And they need to beat Syracuse, which I think they could.
They definitely could.
I think they could beat Syracuse. But what did you see from the Wolfpack that was encouraging that we can take going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it comes with the obvious caveat of, it was Boston College, and I mean, it really feels like this is like end game here for Earl Grant and BC. Like the wheels have sort of just fallen off this season without Quentin Post. But I thought it was one of State's best two-way performances of the season. It's not like they were like scintillating on offense, but it was the most efficient offensive game they'd had in a month since the loss to Cal in Raleigh, and it was their most efficient defensive performance of the ACC season. I thought it was impressive that they didn't have sort of like the one spell of the game where they just went 4 straight minutes without a bucket.
Right.
There was none of that. I thought Jaden Taylor did a nice job sort of like establishing a rhythm early. I mean, he didn't have like a hyper-efficient game, 6 of 16 shooting, but he got him going early on. And then I just thought like both Middlebrooks and Brandon Huntley-Hatfield did a nice job in the screen roll game. And those guys got downhill. They made some plays on the short roll. Michael O'Connell got going. That was probably the best game he's had, and I don't even know how long. It's not like he shot a crazy number, but 6 assists, and several of those came into half court, which has been such like an issue of concern for him. I thought NC State and Kevin Keatts had some nice stuff dialed up for Boston College playing drop coverage against Michael O'Connell. You saw them go into that Stack Spain pick and roll look, and they got some buckets off of that. So overall, I thought it was like a solid two-way performance. Like they had BC scouted well, and they executed like really, really nicely. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more Paul McNeil Jr.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got to pick up those 2 fouls and got yanked out and never got put back in. As far as some of the other young guys go, Gold, I think you and I talked about Trey Parker last week. He only played 10 minutes in this game, but he continues to just like pop as a playmaker.
Yeah.
The 2 lob dunks, Dennis Parker Jr. in transition, and continues to make good decisions in the half court out of the ball screen. Like, he does sort of profile as a guy that could really be like a plus starter at that guard position for them, next season or 2 years down the line, something like that. So that's another guy to keep an eye on. It's certainly like he didn't play in the first game against UNC for State. So We'll see what he looks like Wednesday night in the Dean Dome, assuming he's going to be getting some playing time.
Yeah. And it's always a difficult assumption, I think, with Kevin Keatts this year. It actually disturbed me. I guess it was about a week ago. He was asked, and I forget which pre-game press conference it was. Kevin Keatts was asked how he determines, the rotation, and he goes, "It's mostly by feel." And at this point, the wheels had come off the season. Right, they're in the throes of this long losing streak, which is now over. But at this point, like, man, I thought you would have been turning to the freshmen already, but that to me that was a little bit disturbing. I want to see the freshmen be more of it because I think you're going to need to convince them to stay.
Yeah, that's the thing that's like so. I mean, just different now. I think in a previous era, like 5 years ago, like it's a no-brainer. You would have started playing Paul McNeil more, Trey Parker more, Ismail Diouf more, Bryce Hurd more. But given the fact that it's not guaranteed that any of those guys are back, maybe if you're desperately trying to make the NCAA tournament, maybe you do just keep riding with the seniors, and the veterans. And I feel like that's kind of what we've seen. I mean, McNeil and Parker have definitely like played more, so it seems like he's trying to kind of do a little bit of both,
right,
and not fully sort of like commit to the youth movement versus just like doubling down on, the veterans. But Paul McNeil gets in and it gets a layup in transition, gets a steal, and, picked up 2 fouls. One of them was a cheapie on a reach in, but Kevin is he is committed to if you have 2 fouls in the first half, like you're sitting on the bench. But I would have liked to have seen him just to have given Paul McNeil like a little bit more of a runway in that game. But it's tough too because Jaden Taylor and Michael O'Connell were playing good games too. So that can certainly like make things a little bit more congested in terms of finding minutes for the young guys.
Yeah, I just think those guys have to be incorporated. You got to give them something, especially because it makes no sense to me to have a 9-game losing streak and you have freshmen who you have teased your fans over the last month and a half and still not use him. But again, I agree. I think Trey Parker could be big. It was a good win for North Carolina at Syracuse. It's good to see Jalen Withers. I actually kind of have started to see him start to get back into the flow. I don't know if he was dealing with an injury or an illness or whatever, but Withers had completely gone to the other end of their rotation. But he was really good, especially in the second half at Syracuse. We could call it the Jalen Withers game, I guess. But that was I believe that if North Carolina can win all of their remaining games other than the Duke one, I think, and like maybe win twice, at least once at the ACC tournament, I think they're an NCAA tournament team.
Yeah, I mean they're right. They're right there, obviously, and there's some work to be done, but they certainly have some opportunities. And I think both UNC and Wake having Duke on their remaining schedule before the season ends is a little bit fortunate for both those teams to have that opportunity in the queue at some point. Mm-hmm. And it goes to the Withers game just goes to show you when UNC gets a little bit more scoring and shooting punch from the front court, everything else can kind of fit into place a little bit more with the guards. I think it was good to see Ian Jackson get going. It felt like he hadn't had a good game since the game in Raleigh against State back in January when he hit 5 threes. Mm-hmm. He'd sort of been struggling since then. So big for him to get going. And then Withers. I mean, who knows how consistent it is with the shot, stuff like that. But they've been pretty. I mean, I think Drake Powell, who's super talented, has given them some production this season, but they've been really starved for one more guy to be a consistent stretch option in the front court. I mean, it was supposed to be Kay Tyson on paper, at least heading into the season. That just never got off the ground at all. Withers got to was starting this season at the power forward, so we'll see if this guy's a veteran. He's a good defensive player, good energy guy. So it's when he's playable, if he makes enough shots to make him playable, he's a really nice two-way piece. But I mean, for years now, the shot has been sort of like a swing skill for him, even going back to his time at Louisville. So something to monitor with him down the stretch. But yes, if he's even 75% of that every game from here on out, it's actually a pretty big deal for them.
No, see, I think it's a big deal too, but ultimately I don't think it changes North Carolina's calculus. I still think that their hole in the middle, their lack of offensive rebounding, their lack of defensive rebounding, their lack of being able to get offense other than maybe a putback here and there or a lob to Jalen Washington. They don't get anything from the 5 spot.
It's definitely part of that. I just think too, it's they have these 4 guards who are all good, all very big recruits, talented. Jackson's an NBA player. Obviously, Trimble and Cadeau, after some good starts to the year shooting the ball, really dipped. I think Cadeau's decision making has been up and down this season, but it's just the fact that those guys don't they have all this guard talent, but it's not a lot of shooting. And in lineups, if one of just Davis or Jackson is on the court, then they only have one shooter out there. And even if they have those 2 guys out there, they're often being surrounded by multiple, shaky or sort of questionable shooters. It's there's this one version of this where you have 4 guards and you spread the court and you run pick and roll and you spray out the shooters. That could work, but they don't really have the pieces for that. Then you have guys like Cadeau and Trimble that there is a bit of a fit concern with them too. So, I think if you had simulated this season out 10,000 times, I mean, I don't know. I think it goes better in most cases, than it has this time. But there are some genuine concerns in terms of how that guard room is oriented.
Yeah, again, there's so many options and combinations you can do in Carolina's backcourt, and I don't know that any of it is good enough to compensate against good teams. Carolina can beat basically every team in the league except maybe the top 2, with Louisville being the 3rd team, because I think that the top 2 teams can bully you around the rim.
Clemson's we talked about this last Monday, and then those teams played last Monday night, and Clemson blew them out. It's just a really bad matchup for UNC on both ends of the floor.
Let me, Brian Geisinger is joining us here. Split the Action on Substack. You got to check that out. 24/7 Sports, Pack Pride, Buzzbeat is everywhere. Let me quickly about Duke's win over Stanford, and Duke plays Virginia tonight, which Virginia's playing better. I don't think Virginia's very good, but they're playing better, and it will not be an easy environment to play at John Paul Jones Arena. But what do we learn What did we learn about Duke against Stanford and against Cal too? Since the Blue Devils had 2 pretty comfortable wins.
Yeah, I mean the offense Saturday was ridiculous. I know Stanford's not exactly a defensive stalwart, but I mean that was Duke's most efficient offensive game of the season. Like
right.
they were amazing in it. I mean, it just goes to show you like they can problem solve against different defenses. Like you play against Stanford and Cal, 2 teams that play a lot of deep drop coverage. When they guard ball screens, they're putting Maxime Reynaud or Lee Dort. Those guys are well below the level of the screen. And for Duke's offense to still take that kind of coverage and be able to bust it up is rather impressive.
Mm-hmm.
But forgive the train in the background here.
Quite all right.
But
that's Cooper Flagg coming to town.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But I would also say too, Duke against Stanford, Maxime Reynaud he's one of the best players in the league. He's probably been a top 3 or 4 guy in the league this season. He's a true matchup problem as a 7-1 stretch 5 who can pass and handle. And he had a big first half, but Duke's second half defense against him, like their execution of their game plan, the way they were able to take their first matchup against that kind of player type, and sort of like take him out for a large stretch of the game was really impressive. So I would just say like it goes more towards the sort of like problem solving and malleability of Duke. It's what sort of those games last week showed me, their ability to win in different ways, even against sort of like weaker ACC competition, like still stuff to take from that.